Oh, hi, I'm Richard Brown, and I'm a philosopher. No, not like Tommy the Hobbes. I'm just a guy with a PhD in philosophy. And just because Halloween is over now, doesn't mean we are done talking about zombies. Or more specifically, anti-zombies. Shombies, as I like to call them. Now, it's not clear. Sometimes I like to distinguish shombies from anti-zombies just to make sure people know that we're talking about phenomenal consciousness, which is at stake here. According to me, the zombie world has phenomenal consciousness in just the sense that people like David Chalmers want to invoke. So you take any your whoa, easy buddy, you gonna jump out in front of me like that just for a left turn, homie? Those left turns are brutal. Yeah. So what was I saying? Right. Now, whatever those guys are talking about, like David Chalmers' experience, what he is rigidly designating when he says I am in pain. When I think it's the same thing when I say I'm in pain, but I mean, whoa, people be on their way this morning. Ain't gotta rush to work like that, man. Those left turns almost got me. Anyway, so I'm talking about phenomenal consciousness. So, you know, anti-zombies, it's not clear that Frankish really thinks they're conceivable in the sense that I'm talking about. And if that has anything to do with his notion of an anti-zombie, then I want to sort of distance myself from it, or at least emphasize that the sort of thing we're talking about is phenomenal consciousness in the full-blown sense, subjectivity, what is likeness, all that fucking shit, dude. Physical. All right, okay. So now I was having a lot of fun making these videos and dorking around at the skate parks. And in the comments, someone pointed me to a paper by someone I don't know, I hadn't heard of him, Richard Johns. Paper arguing against physicalism on the basis of intentionality. Now, objections based on intentionality are old, just like objections based on consciousness, but this one's trying to put a new twist on it. I mean, the basic idea, as far as I can gather, first of all, the paper is attacking a type A physicalism, and sort of in an illicit way defines physicalism as only type A physicalism. So there's got to be a priori deducibility from some limited base facts in the physical language to consciousness, or else it's not physicalism, according to Johns. That seems dubious to me. Type B physicalism, still physicalism. Just like real empiricist version of physicalism instead of, you know, rationalist version of physicalism. Doesn't mean it's not physicalism. Anyway, so you could be a type B physicalist and go on with your life and ignore the argument. And that side of me says cool. But what's supposed to be the issue here? Well, the issue, he thinks, is that physicalism requires this kind of a priori knowability or deducibility. To be a physical property is such that if you had full knowledge of reality, you'd be able to deduce its nature or something like that. So he thinks there's a contradiction there when it comes to intentionality, where intentionality roughly is the what the mental states are about. So, you know, I can be afraid that it's going to rain today. I can think that it's going to rain today. I can believe that it's going to rain today. I can judge that it's going to rain today. I can hope that it's going to rain today. I can be in love with the fact that it's going to rain today, I guess. You know, so you get the idea. There's many different propositional attitudes, so-called, that I can hold towards this content, so-called, the content that it's going to rain. So that's intentionality. There, if I'm afraid it's going to rain today, then my fear is aimed at or directed towards the state of affairs that it will rain, right? There's some propositional content, and so forth and so on. And there's all sorts of well-known puzzles about intentionality, like can you think about non-existent objects and how to give a physicalistic, acceptable account of how mental states have intentionality at all. And nothing like that seems to be going on here. Rather, he's trying to derive a contradiction from the idea that there are systems that are physical with real intentionality. So it involves this idea of an intrinsic semantics. Basically, the idea is he thinks, this paper argues, that if you're a type A physicalist, and you think that you should be able to know from the physical facts, the mental facts, then you should be able to know by examining the state of someone's brain, what the propositional content of their mental states are. So you should be able to know on the basis of what physical brain state that I'm in, whether I'm afraid that it's going to rain, hoping that it's going to rain, afraid of the dog biting me, afraid of the dog licking me, etc. So what is the exact content, intentionally speaking, of my mental states? He calls that the mind reading thesis. So according to the type A physicalists of the world, you should be able to read my mind from knowing my brain states. Okay. Seems like a fairly innocuous claim to start off with, right? If you're a type A physicalist, sure, maybe, okay, wonderful. Who's a type A physicalist? I don't know, but all right, great. So then what? Well, the idea is supposed to be that the way that you're going to get this property is by there being something like an intrinsic semantics, or in other words, that the syntax of the intentional states, the characteristics, the physical characteristics of those states, that's described in non-meaning terms, like that. Property like this brain state is oscillating at 40 hertz in conjunction with these other brain states oscillating in the theta rhythms, etc. So those are all descriptions of physical properties. Okay, so those things must a priori entail semantic content for the type A physicalist to get what they want. But then he does this Cantor diagonalization thing. He says, okay, well, if that's the case, then we can define a property. He calls it the property of being inclusive, where you have a sentence that picks out some property in physical terms, like this brain, there exists an X as a brain state is oscillating at 40 hertz, and then you encode it with the Gödel system. You come up with a number. And then you want to ask whether the number has a property of being inclusive. If the number is inclusive, then the what it represents has the property in question. So if there is a brain state that's oscillating at 40 hertz, and the state which is encoding that is oscillating at 40 hertz, then it's inclusive. So then you get the kind of standard contradiction by the kind of, this is not provable sort of sentence. This is not inclusive. So you have a sentence that says this is not an inclusive sentence. You encode it with your Gödel thing. You get a number. You say, is it inclusive? So the sentence says it's not inclusive. So it will be if it isn't, and you get a contradiction. Now, that's sort of normal stuff. The problem for physicalism, according to this paper, comes from the idea that there should be a physical system that could have this thought. And then, if physicalism were true, it should be able to know a priori what the content of its thought is, but there's a contradiction here, so it can't know the content of the thought. But the kind of obvious problem with this argument is that it assumes classical logic is true. That's an assumption. So maybe the ideal reasoner could know the content and know that there is this contradictory content, sort of like the way we know that there is to be this contradictory content. Yeah, I think. And then on the other hand, though, I think there's a more general worry about all of these sorts of arguments, which actually David Chalmers pointed out way back in 1995, when he was commenting on Roger Penrose's book, Shadows of the Mind, where Penrose tried to give an argument like this, not for the conclusion that, for against physicalism, but not on intentionality, but for consciousness. So the basic idea was that Chalmers had was that there's an assumption here which should be questioned. The assumption is that we are sound systems. So a sound system is one that proves only true things. Or in other words, if you prove it, then it's true. So a complete system is one that if it's true, then you can prove it. So there's an assumption that we are sound systems, so that if something is provable, then that means it's true. And so we just prove something, that there's a contradiction that follows from this assumption. So that means that it's true. But why should we think that we are sound systems? Well, in fact, what Chalmers does in this paper is to point out there's a contradiction in that assumption that we know we're sound systems, that we can assert unassailably that we are sound systems, driving a contradiction from that very claim. So what are you going to do? I think all Gödel type arguments suffer from that flaw. They make this assumption. And I certainly don't think the physicalist has any reason to think that we are sound, that we know we're sound systems, or that we could prove it, or anything like that. So I think there are other things that you could say, but I think that probably is the main thing. But also just to emphasize that this, even if it works, only against type A physicalism, which is something like a minority view. So yeah, we're here now though. Damn, it looks wet, but fuck it, we're gonna see what we can do.